Hello, everyone, in History 371. Thanks also for your feedback last week about the shorter videos on YouTube. We're going to continue with that this week, which you know because you found this, right? All right, so we're jumping into the post-colonial period. We'll have 3 videos this week, and this is the one on post-colonial economy. What I want to do is start by showing you this website, which is the United Nations Development Program Human Development Reports. And these are usually a couple years behind. So these are probably from, 2018, 2019. 2019 is the most recent here. And what the UNDP does, United Nations Development Program, is they rank every country in the world by its human development, right? And there are certain measures for this: life expectancy at birth, expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling, gross national income per capita, etc., etc. So they rank the countries, and then and by the way, there's the US at number 17. We're number 17, we try harder. But they categorize them also as very high human development, as we can scroll down the list here, high human development, medium human development, and finally, low human development. All right, so let's start at the bottom of the list here. What is the bottom of the list? Right here, we have Niger, Central African Republic, Chad, South Sudan, Burundi, Mali, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, Mozambique, Eritrea, Yemen, Guinea, Liberia, Guinea-Bissau, Congo, Malawi, Ethiopia, Gambia, Sudan, Haiti, and Afghanistan. Okay, what is this telling us? Well, if we're looking from the lowest rank upwards, we have about 20, actually over 20, I think, almost exactly 20 African countries. Matter of fact, we have 20 African countries which are ranked lower than Haiti and Afghanistan. Now, Haiti, as you might know, is widely considered to be the least developed place in the Americas, okay? So we have 20 African countries that, at least in these measures of human development, are doing worse than Haiti. And just above Haiti is Afghanistan, a country that's been rocked by warfare for 20 years. And we know because we did it, okay? I'm not saying I was opposed to that. Taliban, bad, kicked our butts. I'm fine with that. But the fact is, as we're seeing in Ukraine now, war has consequences, and their consequences usually are not good for the civilian population. Still, Afghanistan measuring better than 20 African countries. Okay, and then we keep going. Senegal, Togo, African country, African country, African country, African country, African country, African country, Africa, 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 and then Papua New Guinea. Okay, so we're 35 in here, and we've only got 3 countries that are ranked lower than Africa. Why? Right? That's always the key question. Why is that? Now, read, and I like the Read book, okay? It's all right. This section, I got to say, I find a little wordy. I think he goes on a little long. It's kind of wishy-washy. And I understand it. I'm an academic, you know. My standard answer to any question is yes and no, okay? And you want to weigh factors, and he does that. Well, there's a variety of factors, da-da-da-da-da, right? No, actually, there's not. Okay, there's really one factor to explain that. And what is that factor? Poverty, right? It's poverty. That's it. Okay, now we have to look at other factors of why African countries are so poor, right? Okay, but poverty pretty much explains everything. Okay, I don't know, when I lived in Uganda and then I moved back here in '93. My then partner and I were like walking around Chicago, like saying, you know what, we're this close to being in Uganda. The only difference is we have money. You know, we have money to throw at the problems we have. And it really does, of course, make a difference. All right. So looking at that, let's look at one other thing also. Let me see if I got the window open here. Yeah. Okay. I like to look also at the CIA World Factbook, okay? CIA, well, you're going for facts. I go to the CIA. They're pretty good about this. Not so good at, of course, at predicting things necessarily, but like, they didn't see 9/11 coming. But within a day they identified all the hijackers and so on. Okay, let's take a look at African countries here in the World Fact Book. And the World Fact Book is a pretty good resource for a lot of things. I'm going to go to the Gambia because it's a country that I've been to a couple of times and I'm familiar with. And okay, so what do we see here? We've got geography, people and society, environment, government. We're talking about economy today, so let's look at economy, okay? All right, what do we have? Real GDP growth of, 5.9% and then 0.4% and then 4.6%. So not so bad. Country comparison to the world, 58, whereas in real purchasing power, they're 176. Well, Gambia is the smallest country on the African continent, so that doesn't necessarily surprise us, but still GDP per capita, they're ranked 209th, which means they're not doing so well, right? And I assume you know GDP, gross domestic product, measure of goods and services produced in the country, okay? Inflation rate, well, is actually fairly high. Composition by sector. All right, this is going to be interesting. Agriculture is 20% of the GDP. Industry is 14%, and services are 65%. So mostly it's a service economy. Very little industry and also reliance on agriculture, okay? Okay, so industry is 14%. What other industries? Peanuts, fish, hides, tourism, beverages, agricultural machinery assembly, woodworking, metalworking, and clothing. All right, I don't know about you, but when I think industry, I'm thinking like, the steel industry, automobile industry, even computer industry, something that you make something, right? Okay. Peanuts, fish, and hides as industries is the indication of a fairly undeveloped economy, right? Okay, what are they actually producing? The only thing they're really producing is beverages, okay? They have a brewery and a Coca-Cola bottling plant, all right? They don't really make machinery. Agricultural machinery assembly is an industry. They get disassembled equipment from overseas and they put it together. That's a problem. There's another red flag here too. Agriculture accounts for 20% of the GDP, right? However, labor force by occupation, 75% of the country is in agriculture. You have 75% of your people accounting for 20% of the GDP. That means they're not being very productive, right? And they're not. Agriculture here is a very difficult business. Very few capital inputs like equipment, fertilizer, even irrigation and so on. We're talking a lot of hoe agriculture in sandy, desiccated soils. Let me see here. Household income. Okay. Now, national budget, and this speaks to Bates here. What do we have? The national budget, we have revenues of $300 million, and we have expenditures of $339 million. Okay? Budget deficit, right? Now, we're used to that, but African countries, that's a problem. And it's something I'll talk about here in a minute here more, and that's public debt. In 2016, their debt was 82% of the GDP. By 2017, it was 88%. And each year, it's going to get more and more and more, okay? Taxes and other revenues, account balance, negative, of course, okay? And here's another measure, exports, okay? 2018 estimate of $448 million. Lumber, what are they exporting? Lumber, cashews, refined petroleum, fish oil, groundnut oil, all right? Exports of $448 million. imports of 620 million. What does that mean? That means trade deficit, right? So you have a budget deficit at the national level and you have a trade deficit. So in both cases, you have more money going out than you have coming in. I don't know much about budgets and finances, but I know that's not good, right? Okay. What are they importing? Well, a lot of the stuff they're not producing, right? Clothing and apparel, refined petroleum, rice, raw sugar, palm oil, so on. Okay. There's their debt, which is climbing every year. Was 571 million, now it's 586 million, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we can keep going with this, but we don't need to. So what we see is a country which is very poor, right? Well, how poor? Well, let's take a look at comparisons here. There we go. So that jumped ahead here. Okay. If we look, for example, at Gambia, and for some reason I haven't updated these. I got 2014. Oh, because it was the only budget I could get. All right. So you got a population of 1.9 million people. 2014 budget expenditures of 243 million. Land area about 10,000 square kilometers. Compare that with Liberia, about twice the size, at least by population, 4 million people, and, roughly double the budget. About what you'd expect, right? Okay. South Africa, which is pretty much the industrial power on the African continent. Nigeria coming up behind, but 55 million people, 108 billion budget expenditure, land area 1.2 million square kilometers. But once again, look at Gambia. 2014 expenditures were 243 million. The one we just looked at, 2018-19, budget expenditures were 339 million. That's the national budget. That's everything, okay? Everything that they spend on. Quick comparison here for the city of Chicago, okay, which is roughly the same population as the country of Gambia. But the city of Chicago had anyway, comparable year, a budget of $8.7 billion. Okay? CFD, Chicago Fire Department, had a budget of $570 million. Okay, let that sink in. The Chicago Fire Department has a budget which is, 40 to 60% more, depending on the year, than they budget for the entire country of the Gambia. And let's face it, the country has to pay for a lot of things that, the fire department doesn't have to pay for, right? Okay, you've got national security, you've got embassies overseas, you've got education, you've got infrastructure issues, everything, okay? Everything in this country, 339 million, and the Chicago Fire Department is more than that. Okay, the Chicago Police Department is more than the Chicago Fire Department. It's close to $1 billion. All right, so it's poverty. Okay, they just don't have any money to spend. Okay, of course, the question once again then is, why is that? Well, what happens is, I got these out of order here. What happens is a couple of things. Okay, and I got these out of order. Independence comes in the 1960s. Okay, and African countries think they're doing pretty well, and they could do well, right? But if they're producing whatever it is they produce, whether it's palm oil, peanuts, or whatever, as long as they get a decent price, right? Okay. Once again, a comparison would be with the Saudis. They're what are they? They're pretty much relying on a single commodity, right? Okay, but it's one where as we'll see, the price is pretty good. But the problem for African countries from the late 50s, 60s, there's a little blip up in the 70s and so on, is commodity prices continue to decline. Okay, there's a little bit up and down, but the overall trend here from 1950 to 2004 is down, right? Commodity prices in 1950 were up over $80 in comparative terms, and by 2004, they're hitting close to 20. Okay, they're 25% of what they were. Put that in perspective. Okay, so African countries don't have the income even that they used to have, even in the 60s and 70s. And so governments which rely on taxation and especially commodity taxes to raise funds, don't have the money they need to pay for things. So what do? Well, they do what we all do when we don't have money to pay for things, and certain things you need, right, is you go into debt. Okay? And what you see here on this table is from the 1980 to 1992, you see soaring debt for sub-Saharan African countries. Total debt as percentage of GNP, we looked at GDP before, but it's essentially the same, is up over 110%, which means, well, if this was a person, you're making $30,000 a year and you've got debt of $32,000, $33,000, right? And imagine that's credit card debt. What does that mean? Well, it means you're probably paying out more in interest and charges than you have income for, right? Yeah. So 2 reasons for this. One was commodity prices are dropping, but then the prices for things that African countries are buying, especially industrial goods, is going up. And there's one overall reason for that, and that's oil prices. You may not know, historically, oil prices have been pretty low. We see here from 1880 to 1950, prices are hovering around $2 or $3 a barrel. Okay, this is US dollars per barrel. And you know what? Doesn't go up much. Okay, 1955, 60, 65, 70, 75, and then boom, right? We're going from about $4 a barrel to $80 to $90 a barrel. Why is that? Well, simple answer once again, OPEC. Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries forms in 73, 74, and that's when you see this increase. They're controlling the production and therefore the price of this commodity. There's a handful, 4 or 5 places on the African continent that produce their own oil. Nigeria, Angola, Libya, Egypt has some, but most places do not. And of course, you have a lot of the continent which is landlocked, which means they live far from a port and harbor, and every good going in and out has to be transported on trucks or rail over a long distance. So what happens from the 70s onward is the amount that African countries are earning for commodities is going down, while the price of everything else that they're buying is going up. Not only oil, of course, but anything that's made out of oil or transported on a petroleum using, transportation means, which means everything, right? It's everything. So the price of everything you're buying is going up and the amount you're making is going down. Right? So that's going to hit individuals, of course, but also governments, and government revenues then will also decline. This leads us then to Bates, right? Okay, what happens when government revenues decline? Okay, so this is the answer. Okay, 18 minutes here. We're done with this. Meet me on the next one. We're going to talk about nationalism.